I'd like to talk today about a concept that affects this whole topic of psychic readings and finding this or that psychic that's a valid channel, or wrangling over information about reincarnation from this source versus that source, and the list could go on if you really think about it, I suppose. But what I'd really like to emphasize is something that I probably haven't really made clear since I started this show, and there's something that I pretty much take for granted, just from my experience with Edgar Cayce. I spent a good 10 years having the Edgar Cayce readings as the only source of channeled information I was aware of, and so I've read them probably the most of any, and a common theme in there is that the process of channeling is not like our normal information access and retrieval processes that we're used to, like with computers and things like that. We're used to, and with our science, our materialistic bias, it gives us this expectation for yes, no, black, white type of answers. And therefore, when we ask a question of some source of information, we should be able to get an answer that we can go check against something else and see if it's true or not. But with Cayce, it was obvious from time to time that some of his answers were not quite correct, or were flat out incorrect, or for whatever reason almost seemed like he had no idea what he was talking about. For instance, especially when it comes to future predictions, that's probably the area where there's the most discrepancy that people point out all the time. And Cayce was asked about this in several readings. Why are there inaccuracies in these prophecies? How accurate is any given reading? How accurate is a prophetic statement from a reading? And Cayce replied that the whole process was like getting information reflected off of a bent mirror. And sometimes the mirror was a little more warped than others, and that this had to do with taking conceptual information, channeling it through the mind of the psychic, which turned that into concrete human thought type concepts, and then into language. And anywhere along in that process, and apparently in several places before that, several stages before that, in the spiritual astral realms or whatever, the information could get garbled, or you could end up getting completely inaccurate information. And a familiar story from Ross Peterson comes to mind, where a couple of medical readings were like completely off, even though the other like 99% or whatever were completely dead on. And the author that wrote about this noted that those two times that he got bogus readings were readings done on like two different readings on the same day, and it was some day where Ross Peterson had taken some painkiller medication that was really strong, and obviously it had affected with his intellectual process. And when he was channeling a reading, did the source say, oh hey, by the way, you're not getting good information here, we shouldn't do this? No, the source didn't say that. In fact, it went on to answer the question as if it really knew what it was talking about, but the information was like a completely wrong medical diagnosis, and I can't remember what the other one was about, but it was completely, basically useless. It was almost like somebody just making stuff up. So, and personally, I think what was happening there is you probably had very valid information coming from the spiritual side, but by the time it goes through the bent and warped mirror of the brain that's supposed to translate that into concepts, translate those into factual words and statements, probably the right ideas coming in got associated with the wrong concepts and the wrong verbiage coming out, and so you got words that seemed to make sense, but they were actually saying the wrong thing. So I think what this really drives home is that you can't take any one statement or any one fact or even any handful of facts from a given source and say, aha, we've identified those were not correct, therefore this medium is not a valid channel. You have to realize, I mean, if you have any experience with this kind of material over time, over years, and you've really dealt with it quite a bit, it's just part of the process. You start to just take that for granted that what you're reading may or may not be that right on that day. And so, especially with Cayce, some readings were seem to be just parroting back what the people were asking them and stuff. I mean, so you always take everything with a grain of salt, and you always keep comparing. You keep comparing everything you're reading to everything you've read in the past from that channel. And now that we have several channels, we keep comparing everything together, and I think that's probably one of the underlying reasons I'm looking for the continuity here, is not to necessarily rat out the bad channels, but it's actually to expand that process I was already going through with Cayce, where you take every information you're reading, and you compare it to as much as you can think of or remember that you've read from any source that you consider a halfway competent channel, and just try to compare it all. And what that does is it enables you to come to a stronger consensus on each topic. Because with Cayce alone, hopefully you'll get several readings that touch upon a given topic, so you can get some sort of consensus, but you may or may not get that. And so thankfully, the more channels there are, the more comparisons we can make, and the more of a consensus we can get. So if there's 5 different sources that all say that there's going to be some kind of cataclysmic event, that's coming in the future, and due to a number of factors, people are going to die in large numbers in prematurely. And if a large number of them say that, well, that starts to me, that's the way our reasoning really truly works. We like to say that we do deductive reasoning in our science and things, but really we don't. We do inductive reasoning. In science especially, the more examples of something, if something is proven in one lab, it means nothing. It has to be repeated. It's that repeatability. And so if we have repeatability, if we see the same kind of topic coming up more and more and more, well, it starts to gain more respect and more ethos, and it's like I give it more weight. Everything kind of has its own weight. If it's only been mentioned once by one channel, or for instance, Mondranson saying that he's this new magisterial sun that's coming down, if the Urantia mediums are the only ones saying that, well, so maybe he doesn't have as much credence yet as if 3 or 4, especially non-Urantia mediums, were saying there was some entity coming down that was celestial and was going to play some kind of role. So it's not like we throw things out immediately. We just say, okay, well, that's another one of those things that is pretty low on the credibility scale, but we'll just keep it there in case other people start to mention it. And everything works that way. You just take all the information and just let it sit there and simmer, and the stuff that you really get excited about is when you have more and more consensus. So the specifics, especially when it comes to the future, all these channels say that the future is ever changing. It's affected by human choices and decisions. It's also affected by, as events transpire, the whole thing changes. It's affected by the fact that the spiritual realm is outside of time. So apparently they see a sequence of events. That sequence of events could span 3,000 years, it could span 3. And it's immediately not possible for them to tell. They have to apparently cross-correlate different events in a sequence with events that they can see in time and in the past or something, or things that are currently measurable, and try to come to some kind of consensus. But everything is uncertain. So as far as how many people will die, as far as when will exactly this or that cataclysmic event take place, is it going to happen within our lifetime, when should we start stockpiling food? And I think the best answer on any of those things is just keep listening. Always understand the information will get revised as it comes out, and don't wig out if there's discrepancies, especially with future prophecies. The important thing is just to pay attention, keep aware, and keep that channeling going. Please, we need it. Thanks.